Hey, how's it going? And welcome back to Consuming Cinema, a show about making and pairing food and drinks from popular movies and TV shows. This week is a very special episode of the show, as my lovely parents recently celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary. And so to honor them, I wanted to do an episode on a wholesome movie about weddings and the institution and sanctity of marriage.
It's wedding season, kid!
You sandbagging son of a bitch!
So today we're making a daiquiri with crab cakes from Wedding Crashers. But you know, I'm not really sure that this is gonna be enough food for a wedding. I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see. If you haven't seen Wedding Crashers, it's a 2005 David Dobkin comedy about lifelong best friends Jeremy Gray and John Beckwith, who together for 3 weeks out of the year escape the monotony of their jobs as divorce mediators by crashing weddings under a variety of aliases like
Sanjay Collins,
Chuck Vindaloo,
Seamus O'Toole,
Bobby O'Shea,
Lou Epstein, once you meet a real mensch, Chuck Schwartz.
and making themselves the life of the party by dancing, drinking, giving unsolicited toasts, and even cutting the occasional cake. All with the plan to meet beautiful women and then con them into a one-night stand. But at the end of the season, Jeremy drags John to the wedding of U.S. Treasury Secretary Cleary's daughter, an event that he says will surely be
the greatest crash of all time.
And there, John sees and instantly falls for another daughter of Secretary Cleary named Claire. And meanwhile, Jeremy seduces third Cleary daughter Gloria, who becomes immediately infatuated with him,
We're gonna be so happy together.
much to Jeremy's dismay. But before Jeremy can make an escape, Gloria ropes him and John into traveling to the Cleary family estate for the weekend, which leads us to the scene we're talking about today, where John and Jeremy play a touch football game against and get absolutely dominated by the secretary and Claire's obnoxious boyfriend, Sack. That's when one of Sack's trash-talking friends declares,
Yes! Crab cakes and football! That's what Maryland does!
and after Jeremy takes a couple brutal hits from Sack, Secretary Cleary breaks up the one-sided game by saying,
Let's take a daiquiri timeout.
Daiquiris.
but before we can start our daiquiris, we first have to make our crab cakes.
Are you kidding me? Crab cakes? How could you not have a good time eating crab cakes? I love them.
And our crab cakes start in a medium bowl, to which we'll add 1 egg beaten, along with a 1/4 cup of mayonnaise. I like Japanese mayo, in addition to 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, followed by a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce, as well as the zest and juice of half a lemon, in addition to a teaspoon of parsley, chopped, as well as a teaspoon of freshly cracked pepper, and a teaspoon of salt. And last but certainly not least, a couple teaspoons of Old Bay, which is basically like the secret spice to any crab cake. And then we are going to whisk this all together until it's evenly incorporated. And then we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of our filler, which is actually 8 Ritz crackers, which I put into a plastic baggie and then crushed up with a mallet. So add your 1/4 cup of crackers to the rest of the filling. Now we're gonna mix this all together before we add our crab. Now typically for a true Maryland style crab cake, you should use jumbo lump crab. But this time I am using fresh Dungeness crab. And while those from Maryland are probably now thinking,
Erroneous! Erroneous!
I opted to use the fresh crab in order to make these crab cakes as tasty as possible. So add the crab to the bowl and then gently mix everything together, making sure every last piece of crab is covered in the sauce. Then we are going to refrigerate this crab mix for at least a half an hour before we form our crab cakes. And after half an hour, we are ready to form our crab cakes. So we'll get our chilled mix, as well as a baking sheet with a sill mat, and then we are going to scoop out about 1/3 of the crab mix. Then form the meat into a hefty little mound, which we are going to set on our baking sheet. This amount of crab should yield about 3 crab cakes. Then even out any you might need to, and once all your crab cakes are formed, we are going to brush them with a little bit of melted butter over the tops, and a last little sprinkle of Old Bay, before putting them into a 450-degree oven on the top rack for 10 to 15 minutes, until they have reached a beautiful golden brown with some nice crispy edges. And while we let these cool, let's take a daiquiri timeout.
Daiquiris.
And our daiquiri starts in a small shaker tin, to which we'll add 2 ounces of light rum, and I think this Plantation 3-Star is the best bang for your buck on the market. Next comes 1 ounce of lime juice, as well as a half an ounce of simple syrup. Now we're gonna take this tin over to plate. So first we'll set down our crab cakes with a simple garnish of some lemon wedges. Then we're gonna put some ice in our big tin and lock in our small tin and give our cocktail a good shake. Then, into a chilled coupe, we'll double strain our daiquiri, and finally garnish with a lime wheel. And there you have it, your daiquiri with crab cakes is finally done. But you know, in looking at this meal, I still feel like this isn't enough food for a wedding. If only there were some other food we could make. If only there were some other culinary cinematic moment from this movie that would work just perfectly.
Hey, Ma! Can we get some meatloaf?
Oh, you want some meatloaf? Okay, I guess I could go for some meatloaf.
You want some? Yes. I knew you'd go. Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Alright, just give me 1 second here, hold on.
Ma, the meatloaf! We want it now!
Okay, I'm here. Alright, now it's time to get started on our meatloaf. You happy now, Chaz? And our meatloaf starts in a small bowl, to which we'll add 1 cup of panko breadcrumbs, as well as a half a cup of whole milk. And now we're going to stir this mix together to make what's called a panade. Now if you're paying close attention, you'll notice that this is actually the second time today that we've made a panade. And now into a much larger bowl, we are going to add 1.5 pounds of lean ground beef, as well as half a pound of ground pork, or in my case, I'm using mild Italian sausage. And now we're gonna add back that panade that we made, as well as 2 eggs, beaten, followed by a yellow onion, finely chopped, and then simply softened with a tablespoon of butter for 5 minutes or so, until they become translucent. You can leave the onions raw, but this extra step adds so much flavor and makes for a more uniform texture. Now we're gonna add 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce, followed by a teaspoon of soy sauce. Now at this point, most meatloafs call for ketchup, but I'm actually not gonna use it, at least I'm not gonna use it right now. And instead I'm gonna use 3 tablespoons of this American-style chili sauce, which is essentially a more natural alternative to ketchup with more of a kick, followed by a couple teaspoons of Italian parsley, chopped, and then just a teaspoon of freshly cracked pepper, as well as a teaspoon of paprika, and finally a teaspoon of salt. Then we're gonna mix this all together until it's evenly incorporated, but you don't wanna overmix this as it will result in a tougher meatloaf. Now typically, a meatloaf is made in one of these loaf pans, but I'm actually just gonna use this loaf pan to help shape the loaf. So we'll put all of this meat mixture into the loaf pan, and then gently press down to make sure that it's all even in the pan with no gaps. And then what we want to do is take this loaf pan, and onto a foiled and rack-lined baking sheet, we are going to flip the loaf pan over, and when we lift it up, we will reveal a nearly perfect loaf that we will then just simply touch up to our liking. And now we're just gonna put this into a 350-degree oven for 40 minutes, at which point we will cover the meatloaf with sauce. And now we're gonna make that sauce for our meatloaf, which starts in a small bowl, to which we'll add a half a cup of ketchup, 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 1 tablespoon of red wine vinegar, and 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard. Then mix this all together until it's seamlessly incorporated and nice and saucy. Now set aside while we remove our meatloaf from the oven, and then spoon some of our sauce on top, which we're cutting to in the middle of because admittedly I forgot to press record in between the shots.
What an idiot.
So take spoonfuls of the sauce and scoop them on top of the meatloaf, using the bottom of the spoon to spread out the sauce onto the loaf. Then use a brush to cover the sides of the loaf with a thinner coat of sauce as well. Then we're gonna stick this back into the oven for another 40 minutes, or until the internal temp reaches between 155 and 160 degrees. And we are just going to check and make sure that we're at the 155 degree mark, and we hit the nail on the head. And now we're gonna let this meatloaf rest for 10 minutes before we slice and serve. And now that it's rested, you're ready to slice and serve your meatloaf. So cut off a few slices, and finally your daiquiri with crab cakes and meatloaf is complete. Now there's nothing left to do but to taste it. So we'll start with a bite of our crab cake, and then drizzle a bit of lemon on, and grab another bite, and then we'll get a bite of our lovely meatloaf, as well as a bite of some of that sauce. Well, first of all, this meatloaf is some of the best I've ever had, and the same goes for these crab cakes, which are simple yet elegant and really let the crab speak for itself, only needing that little bit of lemon. Paired with this meatloaf, I realized I unintentionally created some sort of new bread-inspired surf and turf, and everyone loves surf and turf, right? Well, everyone, I suppose, except maybe Todd.
I don't eat meat or fish.
Good. More for me and you.
Sorry, Todd. But how do these crab cakes and meatloaf pair with the daiquiri? Well, the daiquiri provides a nice note of acidity that helps cut through this duo of particularly starchy foods. And while it probably pairs best with the crab cakes, the daiquiri is a welcome complement to both foods, and I'm really happy with how this entire meal turned out. So I'm giving this pairing 2 thumbs up. And in all seriousness, all jokes aside today, happy anniversary, Mom and Dad. Here's to 35 more.
You know, someone once told me that true love is the soul's recognition of its counterpoint in another. And I think that that's a very rare thing in this world.
If you like the channel, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Please leave any suggestions for future videos in the comments below. Full recipes will be included in the link in the video description. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Consuming Cinema. And don't forget to join us next week when we kick off this year's Halloween episodes by making a pairing from Ghostbusters. Thank you for watching.